Welcome back. I will now be reviewing all of Sunday's and Monday's action of Week 10 in the NFL. Starting with the early game on Sunday, I forgot to do my homework on this one. This actually took place in Germany, even though the Bucks were technically the home team in this one. It was not actually played in Florida. I did predict that Seattle would get the victory. It was not meant to be. Final score 21-16. I read a stat the other day that said that Brady is now 4-0 in international games. So it doesn't matter if he plays in North America or overseas, he's successful everywhere he goes. Stats for the game. For the Seattle Seahawks, they threw the ball 33 times. They only ran the ball 14 times. They're obviously more of a passing offense than they are a rushing offense. 23 of 33, 275 yards, 2 touchdowns to no interceptions. So a pretty clean game for Geno Smith. For the rushing yards, 4 attempts by Geno Smith for 22 yards, 10 attempts by Kenneth Walker for 17 yards. DK Metcalf, 6 catches, 71 yards. Kenneth Walker, 6 catches, 55 yards. Tyler Lockett, 3 catches, 42 yards with a touchdown. Marquise Goodwin, 2 catches, 38 yards and a touchdown. Noah Fant, the former Bronco, 3 catches, 34 yards. Will Disley, 2 catches, 28 yards, and Colby Parkinson, 1 catch for 7 yards. On the Buccaneers side of things, they threw the ball a total of 30 times. They ran it a total of 44 times. So obviously they're more of a rushing offense than they are a passing offense. Totals for the game for Tom Brady, 22 of 29, 258 yards, 2 touchdowns, and an interception. Leonard Fournette tried to do a pass, so he was 0 for 1. He also had a pick. Maybe just stick to rushing. When it comes to the actual rushing itself, Rachaad White had 22 carries for 105 yards. Leonard Fournette had 14 carries for 57 yards and a touchdown. Keyshawn Vaughn had 2 carries for 2 yards, while Brady had 6 carries for -3 yards. Not very good for the rushing stats for Brady, but he's not known for running the football either. As for the receiving, Chris Godwin led the way with 6 catches, 71 yards, and a touchdown. Mike Evans, 5 catches for 54 yards. Julio Jones, 3 catches, 53 yards, and a touchdown. Cade Oden, 3 catches for 35 yards. Scott Miller, 2 catches for 25 yards. Keyshawn Vaughn, 1 catch for 11 yards. Cameron Brate, 1 catch for 8 yards. And Leonard Fournette had 1 catch for 1 yard. So the Seahawks fall to 6-4, but no real need to panic as you're still technically in first place of your division, and the Tampa Bay are now in first place of the division with a 5-5 record. Moving on to the next game, and quite possibly it was the game of the week as the Minnesota Vikings took on the Buffalo Bills. I predicted that Minnesota would get the victory, and it was a nail-biter, to say the least. A game that they had no business coming back to and winning. Buffalo blew a huge lead, and obviously, at the end of the fourth quarter, I do believe, when the Vikings went for it on 4th and goal, they were just shy. The very next play, Josh Allen tried to sneak the ball out of the end zone. He got stripped, touchdown, and that game ended up going into overtime. The Vikings would kick a field goal. The Bills would try to drive down the field, but unfortunately it was picked off in the end zone. Game over. So the Vikings got a huge victory. They are now sitting at 8-1, while the Buffalo Bills have fallen to 6-3. Stats for the game, starting with the Minnesota Vikings. They threw the ball and combined 50 attempts, while they ran the ball 25 times. So obviously they're more of a passing offense than they are a running. So out of the 50 attempts, Kirk Cousins completed 30 of them for 1 touchdown and 2 picks. For the rushing stats, Dalvin Cook, an absolute stud, 14 carries, 119 yards, and a touchdown. Kirk Cousins had 6 carries for 12 yards. Alexander Madison had 3 carries for 11 yards. CJ Ham only had 1 carry, 3 yards, and a touchdown, so pretty good. And KJ Osborne had 1 rush for 2 yards. On to the receiving. Justin Jefferson, he is an absolute stud on the offense when it comes to the receiving. He had a monster game, 10 catches, 193 yards, and a touchdown. Adam Thielen had 5 catches for 49 yards. TJ Hawkinson, the big acquisition from the Lions, had 7 catches for 45 yards. KJ Osborne had 4 catches for 35 yards. Dalvin Cook had 3 catches for 27 yards, while Alexander Mattison had 1 catch for 8 yards. On to the Buffalo side of things. Josh Allen threw the ball 43 times. 29 of those were completed. 1 touchdown to 2 interceptions. He actually led them in rushing yards as well for 6 carries for 84 yards. The second closest was Devin Singletary for 13 carries for 47 yards. James Cook had 5 carries for 22. Isaiah McKenzie had 1 carry for 18 yards. And Duke Johnson had 2 carries for 4 yards. On to the receiving aspect. Stephon Diggs, 12 catches, 128 yards. Gabe Davis, 6 catches for 93 yards and a touchdown. Dawson Knox had 4 catches for 57 yards. Isaiah McKenzie had 4 catches for 37 yards. Nyheim Hines had 1 catch for 9 yards. Khalil Shakir had 1 catch for 6. And Devin Singletary had 1 catch for 0 yards. So ultimately, would have been better off just dropping the pass. So the Vikings, as I said, moved to 8-1, while the Buffalo Bills are at 6-3. The next game is a battle between 2 NFC North foes in the Detroit Lions and the Chicago Bears. A game I did predict that the Lions would get the victory, and sure enough they did. Although I could bite my tongue, I could have picked Chicago, but I'm pretty sure I went with Detroit, and they got a huge win against Chicago. Both these teams are really struggling. Detroit's now sitting at 3-6, while Chicago has fallen to 3-7. Stats for the game: Jared Goff, 19 of 26 for a touchdown. Jamal Williams had 16 carries, 59 yards, and a touchdown. Jared Goff had 4 rushes for 14 yards. Justin Jackson had 4 rushes for 14 yards as well. DeAndre Swift had 6 carries for 6 yards and a touchdown. And Amon-Ra St. Brown had 1 rush for 2 yards. On to the receiving aspect. Amon-Ra St. Brown had 10 receptions for 119 yards. Khalif Raymond had 3 catches for 47 yards. Tom Kennedy had 1 catch for 44. Justin Jackson had 2 catches for 14 yards. DeAndre Swift had 1 catch for 6 yards. James Mitchell had 1 catch for 4, while Brock Wright had 1 catch for 2. Going on to the Bears side of stats, Justin Fields had a monster game, both throwing it and rushing it. He only threw the ball 20 times, whereas they rushed the ball 35 times. 12 to 20 was the final stats, 167 yards, 2 touchdowns, and an interception. On to the rushing aspect, as I said, he led the team in rushing yards, 13 carries, 147 yards for 2 touchdowns. Khalil Herbert was the second closest in rushing. He had 10 rushes for 57 yards. David Montgomery had 9 rushes for 37 yards. Equanius St. Brown had 2 rushes for 9 yards, while Dante Pettis had 1 rush for 8. On to the receiving aspect. Cole Kmet had 4 receptions, 74 yards, 2 touchdowns. Darnell Mooney had 4 receptions for 57 yards. Byron Pringle, 1 catch, 12 yards. Dante Pettis, 1 catch, 9 yards. Chase Claypool, the big acquisition from the Steelers, only had 1 catch for 8. And David Montgomery out of the backfield had 1 catch for 7. Going on to the next game between the Jacksonville Jaguars and the Kansas City Chiefs. I did predict that the Chiefs would get the victory, and they did not shock anybody at all in getting a victory over the Jacksonville Jaguars. The Jacksonville Jaguars have really been struggling. When it looked like they may be a contender at the start, especially when that AFC South was so weak, they have now proven that they are just the same old Jags. They are now sitting at 3-7, while the Kansas City Chiefs are sitting in first place in their division at 7-2. Final score, 27-17. Here are the stats for the game. For the Jacksonville Jaguars, Trevor Lawrence was 29 of 40, had 2 touchdowns, pretty clean game. Rushing yards, Travis Etienne had 11 carries for 45 yards. Trevor Lawrence had 4 carries for 26, and Jamichael Hasty had 1 carry for 4 yards. On to the receiving aspect. Christian Kirk, 9 receptions, 105 yards, and 2 touchdowns. Zay Jones, 8 receptions, 68 yards. Marvin Jones had 1 reception for 33. Travis Etienne had 3 catches for 28. Evan Engram had 3 receptions for 14. Dan Arnold had 1 catch for 8. Jamal Agnew had 3 catches for 1. and Jermichael Hasty had 1 catch for negative yards. So I'm sure he would have liked to have gotten a second catch to stay out of the negative, but unfortunately, not all those things can happen. On the Chiefs side of things, Patrick Mahomes was 26-35, 4 touchdowns and an interception. No real surprise there. He is, a fantastic quarterback. There's no doubt about it. On to the rushing aspect, Isaiah Pacheco had 16 carries for 82 yards. Patrick Mahomes had 7 carries for 39. Kadarius Toney had 2 carries for 33. Jerick McKinnon had 1 carry for 2 yards, while Michael Burton only had 1 carry for a negative 1 yards. On to the receiving aspect, Travis Kelce led the way in receiving for 6 catches, 81 yards, and a touchdown. Marquise Valdes-Scantling had 3 receptions, 60 yards, and a touchdown. Kadarius Toney had 4 receptions for 57 yards and a touchdown. Jerick McKinnon had 6 catches for 56 yards. Juju Smith-Schuster had 2 receptions for 33. Noah Gray had 2 catches, 20 yards, and a touchdown. Justin Watson had a catch for 12 yards. Jody Fortson had a catch for 6, as well as Skylar Moore had 1 catch for 6 yards as well. The Cleveland Browns took on the Miami Dolphins. I did predict that Miami would get the victory, and they did not disappoint. 39-17 is the final score. The Dolphins are absolutely on fire, and as for the Browns, they started off the season fairly decently, but unfortunately, they have absolutely fallen down from grace. The Browns are now sitting at 3-6, while the Miami Dolphins have improved to 7-3. Here are the stats for the game. Jacoby Brissett was 22 for 35 for a 212 yards and a touchdown. Nick Chubb led the way in rushing, 11 carries for 63 yards. Jacoby Brissett was second with 7 carries for 40, while Kareem Hunt ran the ball 6 times for only 9 yards. On the receiving aspect, Donovan Peoples-Jones led the way in receiving, 5 receptions for 99 yards. Amari Cooper had 3 catches for 32. David Bell had 3 catches for 24. Nick Chubb had 3 catches for 18. Harrison Bryant had 3 receptions for 15 yards and a touchdown. Pharaoh Brown had 2 receptions for 13. Kareem Hunt had 1 catch out of the backfield for 10. Anthony Schwartz had 1 catch for 3 yards. And D'Ernest Johnson had 1 catch for negative 2 yards. Sorry, buddy. Maybe next week you'll get into the positives. As for the Miami side of things, Tua Tagovailoa, I struggle with his last name, so almost every time I try to do a video on the Dolphins, I just strictly stick with Tua. He finished with 25 of 32 for 285 yards, 3 touchdowns. Skylar Thompson also had 1 throw, 1 completion for 17 yards. Leading the way in rushing was Jeff Wilson for 17 carries, 119 yards, and a touchdown. Raheem Morissette had 8 runs for 65 yards and a touchdown. Salvon Ahmed had 3 rushes for 11 yards, and Durham Smith and Tua both had rushes, but for no yards at all. And Skylar Thompson also ran the ball 3 times, no dice, no yards. On the receiving aspect, Jalen Waddle had 4 receptions for 66 yards. Trent Sherfield had 4 receptions for 63 yards and a touchdown. Alec Ingold had 4 receptions for 45 yards and a touchdown. Tyreek Hill, the big acquisition, 5 receptions, 44 yards, and a touchdown. Mike Gesicki had 2 receptions for 31. Jeff Wilson had 2 receptions for 22. And Raheem Morissette had 4 receptions for 22 yards. Ced Wilson only had the 1 catch, 7 yards. The Houston Texans went into New York to take on the New York Football Giants. I did predict that the Giants would get the victory, and they did not disappoint. They got a huge victory, and now they're sitting in the driver's seat, and I do believe, as I've said many times, they should compete for a wild card spot. Unless the Eagles absolutely implode, then maybe they can contend for a title spot. The Houston is sitting at 1-7-1, while the Giants have improved to 7-2. Stats for the game, starting with the Texans, David Mills was 22 for 37, 319 yards, 1 touchdown, and an interception. On the rushing aspect, Dameon Pierce led the way, 17 carries for 94 yards. Brandon Cooks had 1 carry for 5 yards, and Rex Burhead had 1 carry for 2 yards. On the receiving aspect, Jordan Atkins led the way, 3 catches, 72 yards. Chris Moore was in second, 3 receptions for 70 yards. Nico Collins had 5 receptions, 49 yards, and a touchdown. Brandon Cooks had 4 receptions for 37 yards. Rex Burkhead had 2 receptions for 28, as did Damian Pierce. Philip Dorsett had 2 receptions for 22. Dare Ogunbowale, I apologize if I did not pronounce the name correctly, had 1 reception for 13. On the New York Giants side of things, Daniel Jones was 13 of 17, 197 yards for 2 touchdowns. Saquon Barkley, no question, one of the best backs in the league. 35 carries, that's a lot of carries, 152 yards and a touchdown. Daniel Jones had 5 carries for 24 yards. Matt Breida, 6 carries, 20 yards. And Wan'Dale Robinson, unfortunately, had 1 carry, but it went back 5 yards for negative. Darius Slayton led the way in receptions, 3 receptions for 95 yards and a touchdown. Isaiah Hodgins had 2 receptions for 41 yards. Tanner Hudson had 3 receptions for 24 yards. Wan'Dale Robinson had 2 receptions for 20 yards. Lawrence Cager had 2 receptions for 9 yards and a touchdown. Saquon Barkley had 1 reception for 8 yards. The New Orleans Saints took on the Pittsburgh Steelers in a game that I predicted that Andy Dalton would get the victory, but unfortunately he was not able to beat his former foe, as obviously he's a former Bengal, in the Pittsburgh Steelers. Final score, 20-10. Steelers are now sitting at 3-6, while the Saints have fallen to 3-7. So as I mentioned previously, Andy Dalton is the starting quarterback for the New Orleans Saints, and the stats for him and his team look as such. So Dalton was 17 of 27 for 1 touchdown and 2 picks. Taysom Hill tried to do a pass, but he was 0 for 1. Alvin Kamara, not a very good game, 8 rushes for 26 yards. Andy Dalton was second with 3 carries for 1 yard. Jordan Howard had 1 carry for 1 yard, and Taysom Hill had 3 carries for 1 yard. So the rushing was absolutely gone today. Juwan Johnson led the team in receptions, 5 catches for 44 yards and a touchdown. Chris Olave had 3 receptions for 40 yards. Jarvis Landry had 3 receptions for 37 yards. Adam Troutman had 2 receptions for 22 yards. Alvin Kamara had 3 receptions out of the backfield for 19. Rashid Shaheed had 1 reception for 12 yards. On the Pittsburgh side of things, hold on a second, my camera is extremely blurry. I apologize. Let's see if that's better. There we go. On the Pittsburgh side of things, Kenny Pickett was 18 of 30 for 199 yards, no touchdowns, no picks. Najee Harris had 20 carries for 99 yards. Kenny Pickett was the second best rusher with 8 carries and 51 yards and a touchdown. Jaylen Warren had 9 carries for 37 yards. George Pickens had 2 carries for 23 yards and a touchdown. Derek Watt had 2 carries for 5 yards, and Steve Sims had 2 carries for 2 yards. On the receiving side of things, Deontay Johnson led the way for the Steelers, 4 receptions for 63 yards. Jaylen Warren had 3 receptions for 40 yards. Pat Freiermuth had 4 receptions for 36 yards. George Pickens had 3 receptions for 32. Steve Sims had 1 catch for 15. Connor Hayward had 2 receptions for 9 yards. Gunnar Olszewski had 1 reception for 4. And the last 1 o'clock game, I guess you could say, was the Broncos taking on the Tennessee Titans. I did predict that the Tennessee Titans would get the victory, and sure enough, they did not disappoint. It was a close game. 17-10 was the final score. The Titans have now improved to 6-3, still sitting first in that AFC South division, while the Broncos have fallen to 3-6, and it seems like all hope is lost at this point. With all this hype in the offseason, bringing in Russell Wilson, you'd think you'd have a better record than what they do right now, but unfortunately, it is not meant to be. So the final stats of the game, Russell Wilson was 21 of 42 with a touchdown and a reception for 286 yards. Latavius Murray led, and Melvin Gordon each had 24 yards, 9 attempts for Murray, while Gordon had 7. Chase Edmonds had 2 carries for 9 yards, and Russell Wilson ran the ball 7 times for only 8. Not a very good stat when it comes to your rushing offense. Cortland Sutton led the team in receiving, 6 receptions for 66 yards. Jalen Virgil had 1 catch for 66 yards and a touchdown, the lone touchdown of the game. Kendall Hinton, 4 receptions, 62 yards. Melvin Gordon, 4 receptions, 46 yards. Latavius Murray had 3 receptions for 23. Eric Saubert had 1 catch for 12 yards. Eric Dulich had 1 catch for 11 yards. Chase Edmonds had 1 catch for 0 yards. So basically, if you're going to get a catch for 0 yards, you might as well just drop the ball. On the Titans aspect, Ryan Tannehill was 19 of 36 for 2 touchdowns. Derrick Henry led the way for the Titans in rushing, but he didn't get over 100 yards. 19 carries, 53 yards. Ryan Tannehill had 2 carries for 12. Dontrell Hilliard had 1 carry for 2. And Mark Willis had 1 carry, but unfortunately it went backwards. Negative 4 yards is the final stat. On the receiving aspect, Nick Westbrook Ickheim had 5 receptions for 119 yards and 2 touchdowns. Austin Hooper had 5 receptions for 41 yards. I'm probably going to have a hard time with this one. Chigoziem Okonuko, 1 catch for 41 yards. Tyrell Brooks, 3 catches for 24 yards. Derrick Henry had 2 receptions for 14 yards. Robert Woods had 2 receptions for 10. And Dontrell Hilliard had 1 catch for 6 yards. The next game, it was the Indianapolis Colts taking on the Las Vegas Raiders. If I'm not mistaken, I'm pretty sure I picked the Colts to win in this one because the Raiders have just been so inconsistent this season. And just like the Broncos, they had such potential in the offseason of having success this year. But unfortunately, it is not going as planned. Jeff Saturday's first game as a head coach went pretty well. Obviously, like I said, the Colts did come away with the victory. 25-20 is the final score. The Colts are now sitting at 4-5-1, while the Las Vegas Raiders have now fallen to 2-7. So Matt Ryan was back under center for the Indianapolis Colts. He was 21 of 28 for 222 yards and a touchdown. Jonathan Taylor, no surprise, led the team in rushing, 22 carries for 147 yards and a touchdown. Matt Ryan had 4 carries for 38 yards and a touchdown as well. Jordan Wilkins had 3 rushes for 18 yards, and Zach Moss had 1 carry for 4. Paris Campbell had 7 receptions for 76 yards and a touchdown, leading the team in receiving yards. Second place was Kylan Granson, had 4 receptions for 57 yards. Michael Pittman had 7 receptions for 53. Kiki Kuti had 1 reception for 20. Jonathan Taylor had 2 receptions for 16 yards. On the Raiders side of things, Derek Carr finished the game 24 of 38 for 2 touchdowns. So a pretty clean game, no turnovers. Josh Jacobs had 21 carries for 78 yards and a touchdown. Mike Hollins had 1 carry for 0 yards, and Zamir White had 2 carries for -1 yards. Devontae Adams led the team in receiving yards, 9 receptions, 126 yards and a touchdown. The second closest was Foster Moreau. He had 3 receptions for 43 yards and a touchdown. Amir Abdullah had 4 receptions for 33 yards. Josh Jacobs had 6 receptions for 28 yards coming out of the backfield. Mac Hollins had 2 receptions for 18 yards. What possibly might be the game of the week, if it wasn't the Minnesota Vikings and the Buffalo Bills game, it had to have been the Dallas Cowboys and the Green Bay Packers. What an absolute collapse it was for the Cowboys, who were heavily favored in this matchup, and I thought they would have gotten the easy victory, as coming into this matchup, the Packers had lost 5 in a row. Final score, 31-28. It did take overtime to settle this. The Dallas Cowboys are now sitting at 6-3, while the Packers are now at 4-6. Dak Prescott was 27 of 46, 265 yards, 3 touchdowns, but unfortunately he also had 2 picks. Tony Pollard led the team in rushing, 22 carries, 115 yards, and a touchdown. Malik Davis had 5 carries for 38 yards, while Dak had 4 carries for 6. No surprise here, CeeDee Lamb led the team in receiving, 11 receptions, 150 yards, and 2 touchdowns. Dalton Schultz was second, 6 receptions for 54 yards and a touchdown. Michael Gallup had 4 receptions for 35 yards. Tony Pollard had 3 receptions for 13. Kevontae Turpin, 1 catch, 9 yards. Noah Brown, 1 catch, 3 yards. And Sean McKeon, 1 catch for 1 yard. On to the Packers side of the ball. Aaron Rodgers was 14-20, which is very shocking, very low, because most times you think he's going to have to throw the ball 40, 50 times a game, but he only threw it 20, and they ran the ball 39 times, so they finally had some consistency at running the ball that Rodgers didn't have to throw the ball that many times. So final stats for Rodgers, 14-20, 224 yards, and three touchdowns. Aaron Jones ran the ball 24 times, 138 yards for a touchdown. A.J. Dillon had 13 carries for 65 yards. Aaron Rodgers had 2 carries for 4. Christian Watson, what an absolute... I'm running out of words. I keep saying everyone's a stud, but man, 4 receptions, 107 yards for 3 touchdowns, and every single time he got a touchdown, 1, second touchdown, 1, 2, third touchdown, 1, 2, 3. He was always counting on his fingers. It was very entertaining. Sammy Watkins finished with 3 receptions for 47 yards. Alan Lazard, 3 catches, 45 yards. Aaron Jones had 2 receptions for 18. Robert Tonyan had 1 catch for 8, and Mercedes Lewis had 1 catch for -1 yards. So not very good on your stats sheet. The Arizona Cardinals went into LA to take on the Rams. I predicted that the Rams would get the victory in this one, but shockingly, Arizona got a W in what has been a very, very, very poor season, to say the least, for the Cardinals. The Cardinals are now sitting at 4-6, while the Los Angeles Rams, the defending Super Bowl champions, are struggling at 3-6. The stats for the game. Colt McCoy got the start over Kyler Murray, 26 of 37, 238 yards, and a touchdown. James Conner led the team in rushing, 21 carries for 69 yards and 2 touchdowns. Keontae Ingram had 1 carry for 5, and Colt McCoy had 4 carries for 4 yards. DeAndre Hopkins is back and healthy. Not healthy, I guess he was also suspended. I do apologize, but he had 10 receptions for 98 yards. Rondell Moore had 9 receptions for 94. James Conner had 3 receptions for 17. Zach Ertz, who I just found out is now going to be out for the season, only had 1 catch for 12 yards. A.J. Green, 2 catches for 10. Trey McBride, 1 catch for 7 yards. On the Rams side of the ball, it was not Matthew Stafford who was starting. It was John Wolford. He went 24 of 36, 212 yards, 1 touchdown, 1 interception. Bryce Perkins also threw the ball once, but it was just for -3 yards. Cam Akers led the team in rushing, but it was a very poor outing. 6 carries for 22 yards. Darnell Henderson had 6 carries for 21 yards. Kyron Williams had 1 carry for 9 yards. Brandon Powell had 1 carry for 7. Bryce Perkins had 3 carries for 4 yards. And John Wolford had 3 carries for 3 yards. So the rushing game was absolutely not there at all for the Rams. Leading the team in receptions was Tyler Higbee. And I cannot make this thing not be blurry. Come on. I'm almost gone through this. Let's go. I'm not redoing this video. I'm already half an hour in. Cannot make this not be blurry. I do apologize. I'm just going to continue the way it is. So Tyler Higbee led the team in receiving yards, 8 catches for 73 yards. Allen Robinson had 4 receptions for 44. Kyron Williams had 3 receptions for 30. Van Jefferson had 3 receptions for 27 and a touchdown. Ben Schoenuk had two receptions for 14 yards. Darrell Henderson had 1 catch for 11. Bryson Hopkins had 1 catch for 11. And Cooper Kupp had 3 receptions for -1 yards. Not like Cooper Kupp at all, but again, he doesn't really have a quarterback at the time, for the time right now. The Los Angeles Chargers took on the San Francisco 49ers in a game that I predicted that the 49ers would get the victory, and it was close. 22-16 was the final score. The 49ers now improved to 5-4, while the Chargers have now fallen to 5-4. Both have identical records, but no real need to panic for either one of these teams, as both these teams are still technically in a wild card position. So the stats for the game. Justin Herbert was 21 of 35, a touchdown and an interception. Chase Daniel threw the ball twice, but 0 completions. Austin Eckler led the team in rushing, 6 carries for 24 yards. Justin Herbert had 5 carries for 22. Isaiah Spiller had 4 carries for 3 yards, and Sonny Mitchell only had 1 carry for 2 yards. DeAndre Carter had 4 receptions for 64 yards and a touchdown, leading the team in receiving. Josh Palmer had 3 receptions for 44 yards. Austin Eckler had 7 7 receptions for 39 yards. Jared Everett had 2 receptions for 23 yards. Trey McKitty had 3 receptions for 21 yards. Richard Rogers only had 1 catch for 4. Xander Hovert had 1 catch for 1 yard. And that's it for that. On to the 49ers. Jimmy G, 19 of 28, 240 yards, no touchdowns, no interceptions. Elijah Mitchell led the team in rushing, 18 carries for 89 yards. Christian McCaffrey had 14 carries for 38 yards and a touchdown. Deebo Samuel had 4 carries, 27 yards. And Jimmy G had 5 carries, 3 yards, and a touchdown. Leading the team in receiving was Brandon Ayuk, 6 catches, 84 yards. Jaywan Jennings had 4 catches for 40. Christian McCaffrey had 4 catches out of the backfield for 39 yards. Ray McLeod had 1 catch for 33. Deebo Samuel had 2 catches for 24. George Kittle had 1 catch for 21. And Elijah Mitchell finished with 1 catch for -1 yard. And quite possibly one of the biggest upsets on the weekend, I guess on Monday technically, was the Washington Commanders and the Philadelphia Eagles. Coming into this matchup, I predicted that the Eagles would stay perfect, but unfortunately, that's not how fate wanted to hand things out. The Eagles are now sitting at 8-1, while the Washington Commanders are back at 500 with a 5-5 record. Unfortunately, this was not Carson Wentz's return to Philadelphia. I'm sure this is a game that he had circled on his calendar when the season first came out, but he is not playing. He is not the starting quarterback. It's obviously Taylor Heineke, and his stats for the game go as follows. He was 17 of 29, 211 yards, no touchdowns, and 1 interception. Brian Robinson led the team in rushing, 26 carries, 86 yards, and a touchdown. Antonio Gibson had 14 carries for 44 yards and a touchdown. Curtis Samuel had 4 rushes for 12 yards, and Taylor Heineke had 5 carries for 10 yards. Leading the team in a big way in receiving was Terry McLaurin, who had 8 receptions, 128 yards. Curtis Samuel was in second place with 100 yards less, so he had 2 receptions for 28. De'Ami Brown had 1 catch for 15 yards. Antonio Gibson had 3 catches for 14. Jahia Dotson had 1 catch for 14. Logan Thomas had 2 catches for 12 yards. And on the Eagles aspect, the Eagles side of things, Jalen Hurts finished the game 17 of 26, 175 yards, 2 touchdowns, and an interception. Miles Sanders led the team in rushing, 12 carries, 54 yards. Jalen Hurts had 6 carries for 28 yards and a touchdown. Kenneth Gainwell had 1 rush for 7 yards, and Boston Scott had 1 carry for 5. Quez Watkins led the team in receiving. He had 4 receptions for 80 yards. Devontae Smith had 6 receptions, 39 yards, and a touchdown. Dallas Goedert had 3 receptions for 23 yards and a touchdown. Jack Stoll had 1 catch for 11. Zach Pascal had 1 catch for 10. A.J. Brown had 1 catch for 7. And Kenneth Gainwell had 1 catch for 5. I hope you all enjoyed this. I know this is a lot longer than usual, and I do apologize for the screw-ups, but I just don't have time to make my edits. So this is a lot longer video than usual. I want to go start doing this from now on, where I'm literally going to go through every single stat of every team on the offensive side of things. I just find that this is more of what I really wanted to do, but in the past, I just never had the time. So now I'm actually taking time to basically tell all the stats from quarterbacks to running backs and receiving yards and receivers as well. So I apologize for the many screw-ups that I had in this, but I hope you all enjoyed it. Until next time, take care.